There is one big question in modern medicine right now. What if instead of fighting every disease separately, we started targeting aging itself as the root cause? Not just treating symptoms, but putting out the hidden fire that quietly smolders inside the body for years. And today we are going to talk about a new approach that could become a real breakthrough in this area and may seriously change medicine over the next few years. And maybe this is not just about another new drug, but about an attempt to bring aging itself under control. Imagine that inside your body there is a small fire constantly burning in the background. You do not feel it. It does not hurt. But it is there. And as we get older, it slowly grows stronger. This condition is called chronic low-grade inflammation. The scientific term is inflammaging. And the problem is that this silent fire gradually damages the body, injures blood vessels, disrupts metabolism, affects the brain, and accelerates the development of almost every age-related disease: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and all of them are really different faces of the same underlying process. But here is what makes this especially interesting. Scientists have already identified one of the key mechanisms that drives this process. It is a protein complex with a fairly complicated name, the NLRP3 inflammasome. Simply put, it acts like a danger sensor inside the cell. When it becomes activated, the body starts producing inflammatory signals. Under normal conditions, this is actually helpful. It is part of the body's defense system. But the problem is that with age, this mechanism can start running almost non-stop, like a smoke alarm that keeps screaming even when there is no real danger. And over time, inflammation becomes chronic. So how do we even measure this hidden enemy? One of the most reliable tools is a blood test called high-sensitivity c-reactive protein, or hs-CRP. You can think of it like a smoke detector. If the level is elevated, it means an inflammatory process is happening somewhere in the body. And importantly, even a mild elevation of this marker is associated with a higher risk of heart attack and stroke. And now here is where things get really interesting. What if instead of simply measuring inflammation, we actually learned how to switch it off? Not symptomatically, but directly at the level of the mechanism itself. Recently, new data appeared on an experimental drug called BGE-102. This is a compound being developed as an NLRP3 inhibitor. In other words, it targets the actual engine of inflammation. The idea is simple. Do not just suppress the consequences, shut down the source. There are several things that make this approach especially exciting. First, it is a pill. Not injections, not complicated therapy, an oral medication. Second, it works very selectively, which means it may potentially cause fewer side effects. And third, and this may be the most important part, it appears capable of crossing into the brain. And that immediately opens up possibilities for influencing neurodegenerative diseases as well. But theory is one thing. What about real-world results? And this is where the first clinical trial data starts to appear. So far, this is only phase 1, the earliest stage, where researchers mainly evaluate safety and basic effectiveness. But the results, honestly, look very impressive. Participants in the study showed a reduction in CRP levels of more than 85%. And that matters, because CRP is not just another lab number, it is a direct marker of inflammation, which suggests the drug is truly affecting the core mechanism itself. And the effect appeared quickly. Significant reductions were already observed within the very first week. And just as importantly, the effect remained stable over time. Another major question, of course, is safety. Because in medicine, a powerful effect means very little if the treatment is not safe. So far, no serious side effects have been reported, which means researchers may have found not only a potent therapy, but also one with a very favorable safety profile. Of course, this is still far from a final conclusion. But for a phase 1 study, it is a very strong signal. And now we come to the bigger question. What does all of this actually mean in the larger picture? Is this simply another promising clinical trial? Or could it be something much bigger? And honestly, this may be the most powerful idea to come out of the entire study. The chief medical officer at Biog directly compared the potential of this approach to statins. Think about that for a second. Statins completely changed cardiology by bringing cholesterol under control, even though they also came with side effects. And now the idea is that NLRP3 inhibitors could potentially do the same thing for inflammation. Two different enemies, inflammation and cholesterol, and two different weapons. But in the end, the goal is very similar: reducing cardiovascular risk by targeting one of its root causes. In many ways, BGE-102 is positioning itself as a possible statin for inflammation. Yes, the early results look extremely promising. But of course, this is still only the beginning. So what happens next? What is the plan moving forward? Development is moving very quickly. By mid-2026, 2 additional studies are already scheduled to begin. One will focus on cardiovascular risk reduction, while the second will target a completely different eye disease, which once again highlights how broad the drug's potential may be. And by 2027, the company is planning to launch Phase 3, the final stage of clinical trials. And still, the biggest question remains open. For decades, medicine has focused on controlling blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar. But what if the next major step is controlling inflammation itself? And if that turns out to be true, then maybe we are witnessing the beginning of an entirely new era in medicine. An era where protecting health starts at the level of the fundamental mechanisms of aging itself. And the next few years will show us whether this vision becomes reality.